In the distant future, where humans and aliens mingled across galaxies, there were places where the powerful bought and sold lives like they were just objects. One of those places was the grand estate of Lord Tharax, a wealthy alien from the planet Zora. His mansion stood on the edge of the galaxy, towering above the smaller buildings of his workers. Among his many servants was Jax, a humble human who had been serving the Lord for years. Jax's life was simple. His job was to clean, cook, and do whatever Lord Tharax required. He never questioned the way things worked. He had learned early on that his position in the world was not to ask questions, but to follow orders. The alien world he lived in was vast, full of strange beings and new technologies, but his life remained small. That morning, however, felt different. As the suns rose over the horizon, casting their light across the glittering mansion, Jax was summoned to meet a new arrival. Lord Tharax's voice boomed across the halls of the estate, calling for his servant. "Jax, come here at once!" Jax hurried to obey, wiping his hands on his apron before rushing toward the grand hall. Inside, Lord Tharax stood near a new figure, a woman unlike any Jax had seen before. She was an alien, but not one he recognized from the various species that passed through the estate. Her skin was a shade of pale blue, and her eyes shimmered, like twin stars. Her hair was long, flowing, and dark like the deep space between the stars. She looked fragile, her head bent low as if she carried a great burden, and her hands were shackled together with chains that jingled as she moved. "This is Lyra," Lord Tharax announced proudly. "She is a new addition to my collection. You will take care of her." Jax's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time Lord Tharax had bought a slave, but something about this woman seemed different. Her eyes met his briefly, and there was something in them, something intelligent, something that didn't belong to the frightened creature standing before him. Lyra did not speak. She stood there silently, her gaze lowered, as if she had given up hope. Jax couldn't help but wonder why someone so dignified had ended up in this situation. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her chains, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. Lord Tharax waved his hand dismissively. "You'll do as usual, Jax. Show her to her quarters, feed her, and make sure she knows her place. She's to be treated as property like the rest." Jax nodded, his thoughts racing. He had seen his master treat slaves poorly, but this felt different. There was an air of mystery around Lyra. He could feel it, as if there was more to her story than what was visible on the surface. As he led her through the halls, Jax couldn't stop himself from stealing glances at her. Her eyes were downcast, but he caught a flicker of defiance when their gazes met. It lasted only a moment before she looked away again, but Jax couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't like the other slaves. When they reached her assigned room, he motioned for her to enter. The room was small but furnished with a bed and a table, like any other servant's quarters. Lyra walked in without a word, her chains dragging on the floor. Jax hesitated before speaking. "I'll bring you your food shortly." She nodded slightly, but said nothing. He noticed how she stiffened when he stepped closer to her. It wasn't fear, at least not the kind he was used to seeing. There was something else, something deeper. "I'm sorry you're here," he said quietly, his voice low so Lord Tharax wouldn't hear. "But you don't belong here. You should be free." Lyra's eyes flashed with something that almost looked like hope, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as though measuring whether he could be trusted. "I'll be fine," she whispered, though the words didn't seem to convince either of them. She turned away from him, and Jax left the room, his mind spinning with questions. What was her story? Why did she look so different from the others? She wasn't just a slave. Jax could feel it, but he had no idea how or why she had ended up in this place and why Lord Therax seemed so proud of his new acquisition. As he walked back down the hallway, he couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something about Lyra that called to him, something he couldn't explain. His role was clear. He was a servant, just like her. But somehow, deep down, he knew there was more to this story. That night, after his chores were finished and the estate was quiet, Jax found himself walking past Lyra's quarters. The door was slightly ajar, and he paused, hesitating. He wasn't supposed to be talking to the slaves, let alone making any kind of connection with them, but something tugged at his conscience. He approached the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. As he peered inside, he saw Lyra sitting on the edge of her bed, staring out of the window. Her chains were still on, but she was no longer sitting in the defeated posture he had seen earlier. Instead, she seemed alert, her posture rigid, as if she were waiting for something, someone. He couldn't see her face clearly, but Jax could feel the tension in the air. She was thinking, planning. She wasn't resigned to her fate. She had a plan. The question was, what was it? For the first time in his life, Jax felt that he wasn't just a servant. He was part of something bigger, something he didn't understand. The events to come would change everything. For better or for worse, his life was about to take a turn. The following days were much like the ones before Lyra's arrival, quiet and uneventful, at least on the surface. Jax continued his duties as usual, cleaning and cooking, attending to Lord Therax's needs. But something about Lyra lingered, in his thoughts, a presence he couldn't shake. Her quiet strength, her defiant eyes, even the way she held herself in the face of her chains, it was all too strange. She didn't act like the other slaves. She didn't look afraid. Jax would pass by her room during the day, always making sure to follow the rules and not speak to her unless necessary. But his curiosity grew with each passing moment. Why was she so different? And why was she here, in this position, when she clearly wasn't like the others? It wasn't long before he noticed something peculiar. Lyra rarely left her quarters, only emerging to eat the food Jax brought to her. She never interacted with the other slaves, but that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the way she moved, almost too deliberately, as if she was aware of every step, every glance. There were moments when Jax would find her staring out of the window, her expression distant and unreadable, like she was waiting for something, or someone. One evening, as Jax carried a tray of food to her room, he found her in the hall, standing, still near a window. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her face turned toward the sky. The sight startled Jax, and he nearly dropped the tray. She didn't hear him coming. "Lyra?" he called softly, trying to sound natural. She turned, and for the first time she smiled at him, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I didn't hear you," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made Jax uneasy. I brought your meal," Jax said, stepping forward. "Thank you," she replied, taking the tray without hesitation. But her eyes never left his. There was something searching in her gaze, as if she were measuring him, trying to determine whether he could be trusted. Jax lingered for a moment longer than he should have, staring at the tray in her hands, but something deep inside him told him he wasn't seeing the full picture. "Are you well?" he asked, his voice low and careful. "You don't seem like the others." She tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of a thoughtful frown crossing her face. "I am fine, Jax. Don't worry about me." But Jax wasn't convinced. There was something off about her. It wasn't just the way she carried herself, nor the strange look in her eyes whenever she spoke. It was her silence, the guarded way she refused to talk about her past. He couldn't let it go. That night, after his work was done and the house had settled into its usual silence, Jax found himself once again walking past her door. He hadn't meant to. He was only trying to get some rest after a long day, but something about the situation kept pulling at him. As he reached her room, he paused. The door was slightly cracked open. Normally, he would never intrude on a slave's quarters, but tonight, something inside him told him to look. Maybe there was something, anything, that could explain the strange feeling he had. He pushed the door open slowly, just enough to peek inside. Lyra was sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but there was a tense energy about her, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Jax was about to turn and leave when a sudden sound made him freeze. It was a whisper, just loud enough for him to hear. "Please, let it be him." Jax's heart raced. The words had come from Lyra, but she wasn't speaking to anyone. She wasn't even looking at anyone. She was talking to herself, murmuring under her breath in a language Jax didn't recognize. He leaned in closer, careful not to make a sound. Lyra was still, her eyes closed, her lips moving as though in silent prayer. The strange symbols Jax had noticed earlier were faintly visible on her skin, her wrists, her neck, glowing ever so slightly in the dim light. They didn't look like any markings he had ever seen. They looked ancient, intricate, and far too complex for a slave. Jax took a step back, feeling his heart race faster. This wasn't just some alien slave, he realized. There was something more to her. The way she spoke in that unknown tongue, the markings on her skin, and the way she seemed to know so much more than she let on, it all pointed to something much bigger than what he had been told. The next morning, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that he had to know more. He tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. The unease that had settled in his chest grew heavier by the hour. Something was coming, something he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't until later that day, when he went to bring her another meal, that he found something new. Lyra wasn't in her room. Her bed was undisturbed, but she was gone. For a moment, panic surged through Jax. Where had she gone? Why wasn't she there? He hurried to search the halls, calling her name softly, but there was no answer. As he passed a small, unused stairway at the back of the estate, he heard a soft noise, a sound too quiet to be heard by anyone else. He stepped closer, peering down the stairs. There, at the bottom of the stairwell, was Lyra, crouched low, as though she had been waiting for him. "I knew you would come," she whispered, her eyes wide with urgency. Jax's breath caught in his throat. "What are you doing? What's going on?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She only looked at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "I didn't want you to find out like this, but I can't hide anymore. There's more to me than you know." Jax's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. But as he opened his mouth to ask more, Lyra's voice cut through the silence. "Help me, Jax. Before they find me," she said, her tone low but filled with desperate resolve. Jax's heart pounded. Whatever was happening, whatever was going on with her, it was bigger than he could have imagined. And for the first time in his life, he had to make a choice, one that would change everything. The days that followed were filled with tension. Jax could no longer pretend that everything was as it seemed. Lyra's strange behavior, her mysterious markings, and the secrets she was hiding, it was all beginning to make sense, or at least he thought it might. He couldn't stop thinking about the quiet words she had whispered in the dark stairwell. "Help me, Jax, before they find me." Jax wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but the more he learned, the more he realized that Lyra was not the helpless slave everyone believed her to be. Something deeper was at play here, something that could change everything. That evening, Jax found himself once again walking past Lyra's room. He had to know more. He had to find out who she really was. She was no longer just a slave to him. He felt an unfamiliar sense of duty toward her, a strange pull to uncover her past. When he reached her door, he hesitated for only a moment before knocking gently. He knew that the last thing he should be doing was involving himself in her affairs, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. Lyra opened the door a crack, her eyes scanning him quickly. She seemed relieved when she saw who it was, but her face quickly turned serious. She motioned for him to come inside, closing the door quietly behind him. "Jax," she began, her voice soft yet urgent. "I can't keep this secret from you anymore. I never wanted to drag you into this, but I don't have a choice." Jax stood in the middle of her small room, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean? What's going on? Who are you really, Lyra? You're not just a slave." She nodded, her expression darkening. She stepped away from him, pacing slowly across the room, her movements filled with anxiety. "I knew this day would come," she murmured to herself before turning to face him. "You're right. I'm not a slave. I never was." Jax stared at her, confused and shocked. He had suspected something, but hearing her say it out loud was another thing entirely. I'm Princess Lyra of the Elorian Empire," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of her words felt heavy in the air. "I was once the heir to a powerful empire, but it's gone now. The empire that was once mine. It betrayed me." Jax blinked, trying to make sense of the information. "Princess? The Elorian Empire? But why are you here? Why would they sell you as a slave?" Lyra's eyes darkened, her hands trembling slightly. "Because they wanted to erase me. I was a threat to their power, and they feared that I might one day rise up and challenge them. So they sold me. They sold me like I was nothing." Her voice quivered with the emotion she was holding back. Jax took a step closer, his mind spinning with the new revelation. That's impossible. You're telling me you were a princess, and they just sold you?" Lyra nodded, her face a mask of quiet pain. "Yes, I'm the last of my bloodline now. The rest of my family was killed, and now they want me dead. The Elorian Empire will stop at nothing to make sure I never return to reclaim my throne." Jax's mind raced as he tried to process what she had just told him. Princess Lyra, the heir to an empire. It seemed unreal. How could someone so powerful, someone so important, end up in the hands of Lord Therax as a slave? "How did you escape?" Jax asked, his voice filled with awe. "How did you get away from them?" She let out a bitter laugh. "It wasn't easy. I had to run. I had to hide. The Empire sent bounty hunters after me, and I was forced to flee to the outer reaches of the galaxy. That's how I ended up here, at Therax's estate. I thought I was safe, but I should have known they would find me eventually." Jax's heart sank. He knew now that Lyra's life was far more dangerous than he had imagined. "But why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "I couldn't," she whispered. "If I had, I would have been, putting both of us at risk. Lord Therax wouldn't have cared who I was. To him, I was just another possession. But you saw something in me, didn't you? You sensed that I wasn't like the others." Jax nodded, his mind still reeling from the shock of it all. "But why me? Why tell me?" "Because you're the only one who hasn't treated me like I'm just a slave. You've been kind to me, and you're the only one who hasn't tried to control me. You see me, Jax. You see me for who I really am." The words struck something deep inside him. He hadn't expected her to say anything like that. He had always seen her as just another person trapped in this world of wealth and power. But now, with the truth laid out before him, he realized that there was so much more to her story. "I don't know what to do," Jax admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "I never signed up for this. I'm just a servant. I'm not supposed to get involved in your fight." Lyra's gaze softened and she stepped toward him. You don't have to help me, Jax, but I want you to understand that this is bigger than just us. The Empire is dangerous. If they find me again, they will destroy everything in their path. I don't know if I can do anything, Jax said, his voice trembling with the weight of the situation. But I won't turn my back on you. I can't. Lyra's eyes shone with something he hadn't expected. Hope. It was faint, but it was there. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't expect you to say that, but I knew, deep down, that you might be the one to help me. I trust you, Jax, more than you can know. Jax swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of the moment. His life was no longer just about serving Lord Therax or following orders. He had a choice to make, a choice that could change his life forever. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead him to this point. But now, standing in front of Lyra, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away. I'll help you, he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. I don't know how, but I'll help you. Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Jax. You're making a dangerous choice, but it's the only one that matters. As Jax turned to leave, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. He had crossed a line and there was no turning back. Whatever came next, he would face it by her side. The days after Lyra's revelation were filled with uncertainty. Jax could barely sleep at night, his mind constantly racing with thoughts of what he had learned. He had always been content with his quiet life as a servant, but now, everything had changed. He was no longer just a worker in Lord Therax's estate, he was involved in something much bigger. Lyra's secret had been revealed, and with it, a dangerous new reality. Jax kept his distance from the other servants, his mind too occupied to engage in the usual small talk. He had made a decision to help Lyra, but he still didn't know what that would mean or how he could make a difference. He was just one man, a servant at the bottom of the social ladder, but Lyra had trusted him. That meant something. As the days passed, Jax and Lyra grew closer. They shared quiet moments in secret, speaking in hushed tones when no one was around. Lyra didn't speak much about her past, her royal life, the empire she had lost, but the weight of her words lingered in Jax's mind. The Elorian Empire was vast and powerful, and they would stop at nothing to find her. One evening, as Jax was finishing his chores, he heard the heavy footsteps of Lord Therax approaching. His heart skipped a beat. The master was rarely in this part of the estate, but when he was, it was never good news. Jax straightened up quickly, trying to look busy as Lord Therax entered the room. His master's gaze swept over him coldly, and Jax instinctively lowered his head. "Jax," Lord Therax said, his voice as sharp as a knife, "I have a task for you. You will deliver a message to the merchant on the far side of the estate. He's waiting for you. And don't waste time. I expect this done quickly." Jax nodded, trying not to show his unease. The merchant Therax spoke. Was known to be an associate of the Elorian Empire, and Jax couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had no choice but to do as ordered, but he had a sinking feeling that the task he was being given was not as simple as it seemed. "Understood," Jax said, bowing slightly. He hurried out of the room, the weight of his decision still heavy on his shoulders. He had promised Lyra he would help, but what if this task was a trap? What if Therax knew more about Lyra's true identity than he let on? The possibility that the Elorian Empire was already on their trail filled Jax with dread. As Jax made his way to the merchant's location, his thoughts raced. He had to be careful. He couldn't let anyone know what he had learned about Lyra. If anyone discovered he knew the truth, the consequences would be severe. The Empire would never let him live. When Jax arrived at the merchant's quarters, he found the man waiting with a small group of armed guards. The merchant was an older, thin alien with dark green skin, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was a man who dealt with dangerous people, and even more dangerous secrets. "Jax, it's good to see you." The merchant greeted him, his voice smooth but cold. "Lord Therax sent you, I assume." "Yes, sir," Jax replied, trying to sound as neutral as possible. "He asked that I deliver your message." The merchant raised an eyebrow. "Message? No, Jax. There is no message. But there is something much more important." Jax frowned. "What do you mean?" The merchant smiled, a thin, calculating smile that made Jax feel uneasy. "You see, I've been informed that there's a royal Elorian fugitive hiding here, a runaway princess. And I think you know who I'm talking about." Jax's heart skipped a beat. He had to act quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The merchant chuckled darkly. "Don't play coy, Jax. I know you've been spending time with her. I've been watching. Lord Therax is just a pawn in all of this. He doesn't know what he's dealing with. But you, Jax, you're in a unique position." Jax's mind raced. He had to get out of there, but he couldn't afford to look suspicious. "I don't know anything. I'm just a servant." "You're mistaken." The merchant stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not mistaken, Jax. You've been helping the princess. You've been hiding her from Lord Therax. And now, you have to make a choice." Jax's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't deny it any longer. The merchant knew. The Elorian Empire knew. There was no turning back now. "I'm not going to betray her," Jax said, his voice low but firm. The merchant's smile faded and he took a step back. "You don't have to betray her. You just have to understand that the Empire is coming. And when they do, they won't be kind to anyone who's been involved with her. I'm offering you a chance to save yourself, Jax. Join me. Help me capture her, and you'll be spared." Jax's heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The merchant was offering him a way out at the cost of Lyra's life. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. "No," Jax said, his voice steady. "I won't help you." The merchant's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Jax. The Elorian Empire doesn't forgive. You're making a dangerous enemy." "I'll take my chances," Jax replied, turning to leave. The merchant didn't stop him, but Jax could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Empire was closing in. He didn't know how long they had before they were discovered. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. As Jax walked back to Lyra's room, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The Empire was coming. The merchant had made it clear, but so had Jax's choice. He couldn't betray Lyra. Not now, not ever. Whatever the future held, he would face it by her side. When he reached her quarters, Jax found Lyra sitting on her bed, looking out the window. She turned as he entered, her eyes searching his face for any sign of what had happened. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Jax took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "He knows about you. He knows who you are." Lyra's face paled. "The Empire is already here?" "Not yet," Jax said. "But they're close. We don't have much time." Lyra stood up, her face determined. "Then we must act quickly. I won't go back to them. I won't let them control me again." Jax nodded. "I'm with you, Lyra. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." The future was uncertain, and danger was closing in. But for the first time, Jax felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging he had never known before. He had chosen his side, and it was the right one. The days had grown tense at the estate. Jax no longer felt the comfort of the old routines. Every movement, every task he performed felt like it was under the watchful eyes of the Elorian Empire. The merchant's words haunted him, and he knew that Lyra was in more danger than ever before. Lyra had spent the last few days in her room, mostly silent. She seemed to be planning, preparing for something, though Jax couldn't figure out what. He would bring her meals and check in on her, but her mind seemed far away, lost in a world of thoughts he couldn't reach. "Jax," she said one evening, her voice steady but filled with concern. "We need to leave this place." Jax paused, his heart skipping a beat. "Leave? Where will we go?" "We don't have much time. The Empire will send bounty hunters for me soon. When they do, it'll be too late to escape," Lyra explained, her voice low, urgent. "I've been hiding long enough. But now they know where I am." Jax felt a chill run down his spine. The Empire was coming for her. He had known it was only a matter of time, but hearing Lyra say it out loud made it all too real. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you," Jax said, his voice firm. "But we can't stay here." "We can't stay here," Lyra agreed. "But we have to get out of the estate first. Therax has too many resources here. The bounty hunters will be looking for me in the nearby cities, and they'll stop at nothing to track me down." Jax nodded, understanding the danger now more than ever. He had seen Lord Therax's power firsthand, how easily he controlled everything around him. But Jax knew that Lyra was different. She wasn't just another possession. She was someone who could change everything, and for that reason, the Empire wanted her back. "Then we'll leave tonight," Jax said, determination in his voice. "We'll go under the cover of darkness." That evening, Jax moved quickly, gathering everything he thought they might need. He packed a few essentials, clothing, food, anything that might help them on their journey. He was careful not to leave any trace of their plans. He didn't know how long they had, but he knew they couldn't wait any longer. As the night fell, he went to Lyra's room and knocked softly on the door. She opened it immediately, her face filled with a quiet resolve. "We're ready," Jax said, holding up a small pack of supplies. Lyra nodded. "We need to go now." The two of them moved swiftly through the dark halls of the estate. Jax had memorized the layout over the years, and he knew the safest route out. The mansion was quiet, with only the faint sound of distant footsteps echoing through the halls. They reached the back of the estate, where a hidden exit led to a small path that wound around the grounds. As they made their way outside, Jax's heart raced. He knew the risks. If they were spotted, there would be no way out. But the moonlight guided their path, and for a moment, Jax allowed himself to believe that they could escape. But as they reached the edge of the estate, a sudden noise stopped them in their tracks. A group of figures emerged from the shadows. Alien soldiers, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Jax's blood ran cold. They had been waiting for them. "There they are," one of the soldiers growled. "Capture them!" Jax turned to Lyra, his mind racing. "Run!" Without a second thought, they both bolted, sprinting down the path that led into the forest. The soldiers chased after them, but Jax had a head start. He could hear their heavy footsteps behind them, the sound of their pursuit growing louder. With each passing second, they ran through the forest, weaving through the trees as the soldiers closed in. Jax's breath came in heavy gasps, his legs aching with each stride. He could feel the weight of Lyra's presence beside him, her determination driving them both forward. "We can't outrun them forever," Jax said, his voice strained. "We need to find a place to hide." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the dark forest. "There's a cave up ahead. We can hide there." The two of them pushed forward, the sound of their pursuers growing closer. Jax's heart pounded in his chest, and the sweat trickled down his forehead as they reached the cave. They scrambled inside, their breaths coming in rapid bursts. Jax leaned against the cold stone of the cave, trying to steady his breathing. "We made it," he said, his voice quiet but filled with relief. Lyra nodded, but her face remained tense. She was listening, waiting for the soldiers to pass. She knew they couldn't stay here for long. The soldiers would eventually figure out where they had gone. "We need to move again," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "They'll come looking for us." Jax nodded, unwilling to argue. They had to keep moving. He couldn't let her down. They waited in the cave for what felt like hours, the sounds of the soldiers fading in the distance. Jax's mind was a whirl of thoughts. Every plan he had made, every route he had thought of, now seemed like a distant memory. The Empire's pursuit had already begun, and he knew there would be no easy escape, but there was no going back now. They had made their choice. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, and keep surviving. As the night stretched on, Jax and Lyra made their way deeper into the forest, determined to outrun the Empire. They couldn't stop. Not now. Jax glanced at Lyra, seeing the same fire in her eyes that he had seen when they first met. She was no longer the fragile, quiet alien who had arrived at Lord Therax's estate. She was a woman on a mission. A woman with a future to reclaim, and Jax would help her. He had made a promise, and he wouldn't break it. The forest felt endless, stretching on far beyond what Jax and Lyra could see. The thick trees surrounded them like a maze, but they couldn't stop, not even for a moment. They had made it this far, and Jax knew that turning back wasn't an option. The Elorian Empire was relentless, and their pursuit would not end until Lyra was captured, or worse. They had been running for hours, moving through the dense woods as quietly as possible, but even in the darkness, Jax could feel the pressure of their situation. Every rustling branch, every snap of a twig underfoot sent his heart racing. It was only a matter of time before the Empire's forces caught up with them. "We need to keep going," Lyra said, her voice steady, though Jax could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been running just as hard as he had, but there was no slowing down. "We're not safe yet," Jax nodded, pushing himself to his feet after taking a brief rest. His muscles ached, and his legs were sore from the constant running. But there was no time to stop. He couldn't let Lyra down. He wouldn't. "Where are we going?" Jax asked, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "There's a safe house not far from here," Lyra replied. "It belongs to an old friend, someone who can help us." Jax's heart gave a small flutter of hope. A safe house. It seemed too good to be true. But with the Empire hot on their trail, he wasn't in a position to question. He just had to trust Lyra. She had led them this far, and he believed she would keep them safe. "Lead the way," Jax said, determination filling his voice. "I'm with you." Together they continued deeper into the woods, their pace slowing only slightly as they navigated through the thick underbrush. As they moved, Jax couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, the feeling of being hunted never far from his mind. He knew the Empire's soldiers were skilled. They would track them, they would search, and they would stop at nothing. The night dragged on, and the only sounds they could hear were the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional distant call of a creature hidden in the shadows. It felt like they were alone in the world, with only the darkness around them and the weight of their journey. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra stopped. She turned to Jax, her eyes meeting his, filled with a mixture of relief and caution. "We're almost there," she said softly. "Stay close. The safe house is just ahead." Jax's breath caught in his throat. He had grown so accustomed to the danger that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope for a moment of peace. If this safe house was real, it could be their chance to regroup, to plan their next move. But as they approached the clearing where Lyra had promised the safe house would be, something felt off. The trees began to thin, and Jax noticed the faintest glow in the distance. It wasn't the natural glow of the moon. It was something else. His heart began to race again. "Lyra," Jax began, but his words were cut short by the sound of approaching voices. They weren't alone. The Empire had found them. A dozen soldiers emerged from the shadows, blocking the path. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, their weapons at the ready. They had been waiting for them. Jax froze, his mind racing. He had hoped they would make it to safety, but now they were trapped. There was no way out. The Empire had cornered them, and the soldiers were closing in fast. Lyra stepped in front of him, her posture stiff, her eyes burning with defiance. "You won't take me," she said, her voice strong but filled with desperation. "I will. Not go back to them." The leader of the soldiers, an imposing figure in dark armor, stepped forward. His voice was cold and menacing as he addressed Lyra. "You have no choice, Princess. Surrender now, and you may yet live. Resist, and we'll make sure your escape is the last mistake you ever make." Jax clenched his fists, his heart pounding, in his chest. He had no weapons, no way to fight back. He was just a servant, a man who had never known war or battle. And yet, in this moment, with the future of the woman he had come to care for hanging in the balance, he knew there was no turning back. Lyra's gaze softened as she looked at Jax, a hint of regret in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "I never wanted to drag you into this. I never wanted you to be part of this fight." Jax shook his head. "You didn't drag me into anything. I made my choice. I'm with you." Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jax saw a flicker of something more than just the fear and determination. It was trust in him. The soldiers took another step forward, their weapons raised, but Lyra stepped forward, standing tall. "You'll have to kill me to take me back," she said, her voice unwavering. Jax's heart pounded as he watched the confrontation unfold. He had never felt so powerless in his life. But then, something changed. The soldier in front of them hesitated. It was just a moment, but it was enough. Lyra seized the opportunity. With a swift movement, she ducked under the soldier's weapons and grabbed a nearby rock, hurling it at the soldier closest to her. The soldier staggered, and in that moment, Jax reacted without thinking. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the woods, away from the soldiers. "Run!" he shouted. The two of them sprinted through the trees, the soldiers shouting behind them, but Jax didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. They ran through the forest, their breaths coming in short gasps, the sound of their pursuers growing, louder behind them. They didn't know where they were going, only that they had to keep moving. The Empire was closing in, but as long as they kept running, there was still a chance for escape. For the first time, Jax felt a glimmer of hope. They might not win this battle, but they were still alive, and as long as they had that, there was a chance they could turn the tide.